I was just thinking about that sitting there. I got to turn this on before I walk up here, and here I go. I walk up without turning it on. But I can't disappoint the sound people because they always got to give me a heads up there. Well, what's that?
We all heard you.
Well, I'm sure you heard me, but the people on Facebook did not hear me probably. But anyway, welcome, last day of summer. I don't think we'll have another 80-degree temperature the rest of this year. Could be wrong, but I kind of doubt that. But I kind of enjoyed the windy day, though, because I have a big maple tree out in two big maple trees, and they're about the first to lose their leaves. One of them's completely gone already because the wind took it away. But thankfully, it took it down the street, and I didn't have to mess much with it. So, of course, in a few weeks, I'll get the big sycamore tree that's right next to me. They'll all be in my yard. But you know how that works. Well, we're on chapter 6. Oh, another thing, we come here. Just seemed like a couple weeks ago we were leaving and it was still light out, right? What happened? I mean, we come and it's dark already, and next week it's going to be even worse with the time change. And that is just a little reminder for all of you. Saturday night, turn your clocks back. You get 1 extra hour of sleep. That's always good. Of course, you'll lose that later on, but enjoy it while you can get it. All right, chapter 6 of Revelation. Let me get there. We've covered a good part of the seals. Jesus is opening the 7-sealed book. We're ready for the 6th seal to be opened, but let's kind of review quickly. The first seal is the white horse, which represents Antichrist. The second seal, or the red horse, I was going to ask you what color it was, but I just told you. So the red horse represents war, bloodshed, violence that spreads across the whole earth. And we know violence is very common even today. We see a lot of violence happening in our world today, but it'll be far worse during the Great Tribulation. And then, of course, the black horse, which represents famine, mourning, okay? High prices, talk about inflation. That's the big word we're hearing during this election time, inflation. Well, it's going to be truly, everything's going to be inflated during that time. There will be great food shortages because of all the violence, because of wars, because of lack of crops being able to be grown and so forth. And then the fourth horse, the pale horse or the green, represents death in many different forms. We have pestilence, which are all kinds of diseases. And we have become familiar with that, with the COVID epidemic just a few years ago. Killing millions of people died from COVID. But I believe there's going to be some strain of something during this time that's going to be far worse. People will die by the sword and even by wild beasts. And we know when there's food shortages, animals come into the city, they come into neighborhoods looking for food. And so they will be ferocious and killing people just to get a food source from themselves. And then we looked at the 5th seal, which was no horses here, or no colors, but the martyred saints. And where did these saints come from? Didn't all the saints get raptured when Jesus came and there were no Christians left on earth? They got saved during the tribulation. So the question is, how? How did this happen? Why were they not saved before? Or why did they get saved? Why did they have to endure? Well, we're going to look at all of that. In fact, the next chapter gives us a little bit of clue about that. So we'll talk about that a little bit later here tonight in chapter 7. But these are martyred saints, people who became Christians. They're under the altar. They're waiting for rapture, in a sense. And they're asking God for what? Revenge. When will you revenge our death? When will you take care of these people that have done this thing to we Christians? So it's obviously not a time of grace and mercy. It's a time for revenge. It's the time for God's wrath to be poured upon the earth. And so they're seeking vengeance for that. And God's answer is, just wait. Just wait. Isn't that a hard thing to do, to wait? It's hard to wait. We get anticipating something or want something to happen now. And I'm sure they wanted just to complete the process, but as we will see later, it was worth the wait. And you know, anything you wait on God for is worth the wait. It always is, because God always blesses that faith in waiting for God's right time. And so wait until the rest of this group that's going to be martyred during this time is complete. And then revenge will be taken and they will be brought home. We'll look at that in the future chapters here. So we'll come back and fill in some gaps, as I told you. But remember, Revelation's like an outline. Got the main points, and then we start filling in some of the gaps. And one of those gaps is chapter 7. So we'll be looking at that in just a minute. So I guess I need to open my Bible here. That would help. To Revelation chapter 6. And we want to read verses 12 through the rest of the chapter here. This is the 6th seal. The 7th seal will not be opened until chapter 8. And I remind you, as you got a little handout sheet, the 7th seal will have 7 trumpet judgments, and the 7th trumpet judgment has 7 vial or bowl judgments. And so these will be interspersed all through the rest of the book of Revelation, with little other details filling in the gaps in between. So let's look at verse 12. And I beheld, when he had opened the 6th seal, and lo, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became as blood. And the stars of heaven fell upon the earth, even as a fig tree casteth her untimely figs when she is shaken of a mighty wind. And the heaven departed, or that is the atmosphere, the sky, departed as a scroll when it is rolled together. And every mountain and island were moved out of their places. Could you imagine such a catastrophic shaking of the earth? And the kings of the earth, and the great men, and the rich men, and the chief captains, and the mighty men, and every bondman, that is slaves and servants, every free man hid themselves in the dens and in the rocks of the mountains, and said to the mountains and the rocks, fall on us, and hide us from the face of him that sitteth upon the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of his wrath is come, and who shall be able to stand? And the answer to that question, no one. No one will be able to stand. Well, let's think about what's happening here for this sixth seal. A great shaking of the earth. Anybody ever been in a big earthquake? Anyone? Most of us have felt little shakings, being on the New Madron Fault. We've all experienced little tiny shakings sitting on our couch, and it starts vibrating. We're wondering what it is. It's just a minor little earthquake. Although one day, they say, not if, but when, there will be a major earthquake. We know there's major faults in California. They're talking about California dropping off into the ocean. But those things are more fact than fiction. I believe there is a day coming, and I believe those major things are going to happen in the tribulation, not in our time here on earth. Although I'm not saying they can't happen, because we do know of major earthquakes all over the world. That's one of the signs of the coming of Jesus. He said there will be diverse or many various earthquakes all around the world, and we see that in various places from time to time. But there's also something else associated with earthquakes. Whenever there's a fault that collapses or the earth shakes, something else also happens, usually somewhere else, sometimes even thousands of miles away. What else is also associated with the same activity? Tsunamis, okay. I wasn't looking for that answer, but that's correct. Tsunamis happen. What else? Volcanoes. They're actually earthquake related, very much so. Now, has anyone ever been in a volcano? Because if you were, you're probably not going to be sitting here today. But when I was in the Philippines, Sherry and I, our first house that we rented when we were in language school was in a place called Baliwag, Bulacan. You don't need to remember that. It took me a while to be able to say that. I had to practice a lot on that Baliwag. I kept saying it wrong. No, and I just never could get it right. But that's a different story. But we had this house with sort of like a townhouse kind of thing. It had a small, tiny little living room. It wasn't very big at all. Couldn't hold anybody. But most of the living was done upstairs because that's the only place we had air conditioning. And since it's so hot, that's where we lived. You lived in your bedroom, basically. But I had one room on kind of a long room that we used as our office. And it overlooked a thing called Mount Pinatubo. Anyone ever hear about Mount Pinatubo? It erupted in 1999. So I was there in 2000, not 1991, 1991. I thought I said 99. 1991. So 10 years later, 2001, we spent our first year there in the Philippines. And from my office, I could see Mount Pinatubo. And trust me, every time I looked out, I did a lot of praying because that is an active volcano, still active today. It hasn't erupted since then, but you never know when it could erupt. It was the second largest eruption of the 20th century. And listen to some of this because as Sherry and I traveled not far from there, we were, I don't know how many miles away we were from it, and apparently our particular location didn't get devastated by it, although they told me that everything was covered with ash in that place where we lived 10 years before. It was a lot of cleanup, pretty bad. But the ash fall, just from this one volcano, covered 1,500 square miles. Now, 1,500 miles is like from the Mississippi to the Atlantic Ocean. The ash from that covered 1,500 square miles, not just straight line, but square miles. There were 100,000 people left homeless. 800 people actually died that were too close to that, which is actually amazing, as devastating as it was. Here's something that amazed me, that the ash from that explosion or eruption lifted 28 miles in the air. Think about that, 28 miles in the air. Now, what is it, 4 or 5 miles you're out of oxygen or something, isn't it? That's something like, what's the highest, Mount Everest? I'm not sure of the height of that, but that's that's almost into space. In fact, I think it might even be considered space. And so 28 miles in the air, one thing. The sky in the afternoon turned pitch black. Of course, being there, they often relived some of that, so I saw a lot of the videos, and indeed it was pitch black during that time. It was the middle of the day, middle of the afternoon, and it was dark, darker than it is out here, and because they don't have street lights and things like that back in those days in third world countries, so it was pitch black. But when they lit it up and took video, you could see the ash falling. It was white. Looked like it was snowing in the Philippines. That's what it looked like, just constant snowfall. It covered, I think, the average was about 5 centimeters deep. The rivers are still clogged, many of them. Now, we're 30 some years later, and some of the rivers are still clogged, and they say it will be decades before it will change. It literally changed the topography of the land. 2.1 million people were affected. 80,000 homes were destroyed. 364 communities were devastated and truly affected by it. One eruption from one volcano. Now, when I look at this scene, I'm seeing multiplied volcanoes and earthquakes happening simultaneously over the world. What do you think that's going to create? Total chaos. And I see some of the great cities falling around the world. I see California, big cities, St. Louis area devastated, and the list goes on and on around the world. There's going to be a shaking. And wouldn't you think that people would, if you saw something like that happening, would say, oh, judgment is coming. It's time to repent, time to get right with God. And what do we see here? Quite the opposite, don't we? But that's not the only thing, not only the earthquakes, but it talks about the stars falling from heaven. Now, these aren't the literal stars. They're so far away, it would take forever for those stars to get here. We all know that. If you go the speed of light, the closest star is 4 years away. So